Bring me the head of a baby. I will make you the richest man in Onit Shah. Before Ajani could speak, the voice had gone and he was left trembling at what he heard. In the busy market of Onitsha, Ajani sat outside his small, dimly lit shop, staring blankly at the red-inked eviction notice pasted on the door. The once thriving electronics store had become a graveyard of unsold goods, dust settling over abandoned radios and forgotten television sets. The scorching afternoon sun did little to ease his pounding headache as the weight of his troubles pressed against his chest. His landlord had given him 1 week to pay his overdue rent, or he would be thrown out like a stray dog. Creditors had stopped calling. They now visited in person, their voices laced with threats. He had tried everything: loans, partnerships, even fasting and praying, but nothing worked. His wife had taken their 2 children back to her father's house in awe, unable to bear the sight of their hungry faces. Ajani was drowning in both debts and alcohol, and the world seemed to be watching him sink. Just as he buried his face in one hand and a bottle of life, a familiar voice rang through the air. "Ajani, my brother! Why are you sitting here like a man waiting for death? Like a man who has had his manhood cut off?" He looked up to see Chidi, his childhood friend, striding toward him with the confidence of a man untouched by life's struggles. Chidi's appearance had changed. His once worn-out slippers were now replaced with polished leather shoes, and the scent of expensive cologne clung to his crisp, well-ironed kaftan as he has abandoned his ragged clothes. Ajani's stomach twisted in both admiration and envy as he teases Chidi, asking, "Whose clothes, Shu, have you taken?" The last time they had met, Chidi was just as broke as he was, begging for odd jobs to survive. What had changed? His friend pulled up a plastic chair as he replies, "Ajani, poverty will destroy your generation," he said jokingly, a knowing smile stretching across his face. He asked, "You haven't heard about Divine Fire Assembly?" Chidi asked, his voice filled with excitement. Ajani frowned. "What's that?" He muttered, uninterested. He had heard it all before. Miracle centers promising wealth, churches where people claim their lives transformed overnight, only to later return to their struggles. Ajani got angry as he felt Chidi was making fun of him, but Chidi leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen, this is different. Pastor Felicia is not like those fake and hungry prophets on TV. She has power, powerful, real power." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through pictures. "Look at this man. He was blind, now he can see. This woman was jobless for 5 years, now she owns a supermarket in Lagos. This man could not perform on bed before, but his A machine, look at me, your friend. The pastor prayed for me and it's success, for success, contract for contract." Ajani stared at the screen with his mouth wide open, his heart pounding. Could this really be the answer, the solution to his endless suffering? Or was it just another beautifully crafted lie? Weeks had passed, months had flown by like a breeze, but there was nothing to write home about regarding his poverty and state of suffering, as he kept working hard, believing his business would bounce back up. Ajani couldn't sleep as Chidi's words haunted his mind for each passing night, each testimony replaying itself like a haunting melody. Pastor Felicia is different. He turned on his side, staring at the cracked ceiling of his one-room apartment as it sang poverty to him. Could this be the way out? Was it possible that all he needed was one visit to Divine Fire Assembly for his suffering to end? His logical mind resisted, reminding him of the many stories of fake prophets and manipulative churches who are nothing more than just scammers disguised as servants of God. But another voice, one born out of desperation, whispered, "Do you want your family to remain poor? Do you want your wife and kids back? What do you have to lose?" After much contemplation and thoughts, by dawn his decision was made. He would go. He called Chidi as they both planned how. They'll go to see the pastor together. Later that morning, as Ajani prepared to go, he struck his leg on a stone as he was lucky no injury incurred. Hidis was a sign and a bad omen, but he ignored. Ajani found himself standing outside his shop waiting for Chidi. When his friend arrived, he wasn't alone. A man Ajani had never seen before stepped out of Chidi's car, a dark-skinned, muscular figure in a crisp black suit, his face unreadable. "This is Brother Simon," Chidi introduced him. "He works closely with Pastor Felicia. He'll take you to the church." Ajani's stomach twisted with unease. Why did it feel like more than just an ordinary church visit? But Chidi grinned, clapping him on the back. "Relax, my brother. By this time next week, you'll be giving your own testimony." Still, Ajani noticed how Chidi avoided his gaze, as if there was something he wasn't telling him as he smelt a rat, though he still went ahead with the journey. The drive to Lagos was long and silent. Brother Simon barely spoke, nor did he say much, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as it was about to run. The closer they got to the church, the more uneasy Ajani felt. Finally, they pulled up to the Divine Fire Assembly, and Ajani's breath caught in his throat. The church was massive, a cathedral of wealth. Expensive cars lined the parking lot, and the golden cross at the entrance gleamed under the sun. It didn't look like a place of worship. It looked like a kingdom. As Ajani stepped out of the car, the heavy iron gates shut behind him with a loud clang. Ajani felt like the gate to his prison was locked. Something in his gut screamed trap, but it was too late to turn back as he had been deceived. Ajani swallowed hard as he stepped onto the marble floors of Divine Fire Assembly. The air inside the church was thick with the scent of exotic perfumes and burning incense. Everything about the place radiated wealth and power. The gold-trimmed chairs, the towering chandeliers, and the ushers in spotless white robes moving with the precision of soldiers. He had never seen a church like this before. A choir dressed in royal blue robes sang in perfect harmony, their voices rising like smoke toward the high ceilings. This was no ordinary church. It was an empire. And at the center of it all stood Pastor Felicia, elegantly. She was taller than he expected, her presence commanding. Dressed in an elegant flowing white gown, she radiated an aura of divinity. When she spoke, her voice was both soothing and powerful, each word sinking deep into the hearts of those listening. "People of God," she began, stretching out her arms, "today your suffering ends. All you enemies will be destroyed." The congregation erupted in wild cheers as they jumped and danced, rejoicing, some falling to their knees, some rolling on the floor, others lifting their hands as if reaching for salvation. Ajani felt something stir within him, a dangerous mix of hope, redemption, and fear. Could this woman really change his life? As he watched, a blind man was led to the altar. Pastor Felicia placed her hand on his head and whispered a prayer. The man blinked, staggered, then suddenly fell on the floor and cried out, "I can see!" The church erupted into chaotic joy, people screaming, dancing, and throwing money onto the pulpit. Ajani felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Something didn't feel right. Chidi nudged him. "You see?" he whispered, his eyes glowing with excitement. "This is real power." But Ajani wasn't so sure. He had seen desperation before, and the way these people threw their last money at the feet of Pastor Felicia felt too familiar. Yet, a part of him wanted to believe. Maybe this was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Maybe, just maybe, his suffering was about to end. But then, just as he was about to relax, he saw something that made his blood run cold. At the far end of the church, behind the large golden cross, a door opened slightly, and in that brief moment, Ajani caught a glimpse of something he was never supposed to see. A man. One of them miraculously healed from earlier, was walking perfectly fine, laughing and counting a bundle of crisp Naira notes. Ajani's heart skipped a beat. Was this all a lie? Was all this planned, scripted and staged? He asked himself, as the realization that Pastor Felicia is nothing but yet another hungry scammer, exploiting the poor who are in desperate need of a miracle and breakthrough. Ajani's smile faded as quickly as it had come. The image of the so-called blind man walking confidently, counting crisp N1000 notes, refused to leave his mind. It didn't fit. The raw emotion on the pulpit, the ecstatic cheers from the crowd, the trembling testimonies of lives changed overnight. Yet here was a man who had just received his sight, handling money like a market trader accustomed to handling change. Ajani shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the hard truth pressing against his ribs like a sharp knife. Could it be that Divine Fire Assembly, the very place Chidi had sworn changed his life, was nothing more than a beautifully decorated stage for a dangerous con? The air around him felt heavier, the choir's songs sounding less like worship and more like a hypnotic chant, designed to drown out questions and doubts. Chidi, ever the loyal follower, leaned in, his eyes wide with excitement. "Do you feel it, Ajani?" he whispered, his fingers digging into Ajani's arm. "This is real power. See how people's lives are changing before your eyes." Ajani forced a smile, nodding weakly, but inside his mind was racing. Chidi had been his friend since they were boys in the dusty streets of Onitsha, where they played football with plastic bottles and sold pure water on hot afternoons. Ajani knew when Chidi was hiding something. His friend's excitement was too polished, his joy too rehearsed. For a man who claimed to have been lifted out of poverty by a prayer, Chidi's loyalty to Pastor Felicia felt less like gratitude and more like fear disguised as faith. There was a secret here. Ajani could feel it, crawling beneath the golden surface of Divine Fire Assembly, and secrets this big never stayed buried forever. As the service continued, Ajani's eyes kept drifting toward the side door where he had seen the man vanish. A soft breeze pushed the door slightly open, just enough for Ajani to glimpse a corridor lined with portraits of Pastor Felicia, each one showing her draped in richer fabrics, posing with powerful politicians, foreign dignitaries, and celebrities. This was no ordinary pastor. This was a woman who had woven herself into the very fabric of power in Nigeria, using faith as her needle and the desperation of the masses as her thread. Suddenly, Ajani felt Chidi's hand tighten around his wrist. "Whatever you do, my brother," Chidi whispered, his smile never wavering, "don't go where you're not invited." It was a warning wrapped in a smile. Ajani's heart pounded as he realized he was being watched. By whom and why? He would soon find out. Ajani's mind raced as he sat stiffly in the golden accented pew, his heartbeat pounding louder than the choir's song. Chidi's warning echoed in his ears. Don't go where you're not invited. But why? What was behind that door? And more importantly, why was Chidi suddenly so careful? Ajani had known him for years, and if there was one thing he had learned, it was that Chidi only became cautious when there was something dangerous at stake. The thought unsettled him. Was his longtime friend hiding something? Or worse, was Chidi himself part of it? Was he part of this organized scam? Ajani's fingers clenched into fists. He had come to Divine Fire Assembly seeking answers, but the only thing he had found so far were more questions. A loud voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "The Lord has revealed to me that there is someone here today whose destiny is about to change forever," Pastor Felicia's voice boomed across the hall, sending ripples of energy through the congregation. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire, heads turning in anticipation. Ajani swallowed hard as her piercing gaze swept across the crowd, and then landed directly on him. His stomach tightened. "Brother," she called, pointing in his direction, "stand up and come forward." Every eye in the church turned to him. Ajani felt the weight of 1,000 stares, some envious, some curious, and others filled with silent warning. Chidi's fingers dug into his arm, but this time his smile was gone. "Be careful," he muttered under his breath. "You don't say no to her when she calls." With hesitant steps, Ajani made his way to the altar, feeling heavy on his legs. As he knelt before Pastor Felicia, she placed a gentle but firm hand on his head. "The Lord has chosen you for something great," she declared, her voice dripping with both authority and something else, something darker. "But first, you must prove your faith." The air in the church shifted, the excitement turning into something heavier, more expectant. Ajani felt his breath catch in his throat. What exactly did she mean by prove his faith? And why did Chidi suddenly look so pale? Something was very, very wrong. Different questions were running through him like an open tap rushing. Ajani's knees pressed into the plush red carpet at the altar, but the softness beneath him couldn't ease the tension tightening around his chest. From the very moment Chidi arrived at his struggling shop in Onitsha, everything had moved so quickly. Too quickly. The wealth, the miracles, the overwhelming splendor of Divine Fire Assembly, all of it felt too perfect, as all signs and indications showed this, like a beautifully painted mask hiding something rotten underneath. Now, under the bright glare of the altar lights, with Pastor Felicia's hand resting heavily on his head, Ajani felt like a man being offered something too expensive to afford. Behind him, the congregation's murmurs swirled into prayers, each word filling the air with tension disguised as reverence. But the only prayer Ajani could muster was a silent one. "God, what have I walked into? God, please help me through this and I will never seek a false breakthrough again," Ajani cried. But it was too late. Pastor Felicia's smile was serene, but her fingers pressed against Ajani's scalp with an unsettling firmness, almost like a warning. "Brother Ajani," she said softly, her voice laced with a sweetness that made Ajani's skin crawl. "To unlock divine favor, you must show heaven you are ready to sacrifice." The word hung in the air. Sacrifice. "I can't kill anyone," Ajani within himself. It was innocent enough, yet something in the way she said twisted Ajani's stomach into. He glanced sideways at Chidi, who stood at the edge of the stage, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, Ajani saw it, the fear lurking behind his friend's forced and fake smile. Chidi knew something dangerous, something Ajani wasn't supposed to understand until it was too late. "I will skin you alive, you this evil friend," as he gazed on Chidi. The choir broke into a soft, haunting hymn as Pastor Felicia stepped back, spreading her arms dramatically. "You will be invited to a private prayer session tonight," she announced, her voice echoing off the cathedral walls. "There you will receive the final revelation for your breakthrough." The congregation erupted in cheers, but all Ajani felt was the cold grip of dread crawling up his spine. From his first step into Divine Fire Assembly, something had felt off. But now, Ajani was certain this wasn't just a church. It was a doorway, and once he stepped through, there would be no turning back. The sun had long set by the time Ajani found himself standing outside a smaller, less glamorous section of Divine Fire Assembly. The grand hall he had stood in earlier felt worlds away. Here, in the dimly lit corridor lined with fading portraits of Pastor Felicia, The silence was suffocating. Everything from that day. Chidi's sudden appearance at his shop in Onitsha, the parade of miracles, the unsettling weight of Pastor Felicia's hand on his head, felt like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Yet, here he was, following an usher dressed in black, his footsteps echoing ominously against the polished marble floor. Every step forward felt like walking deeper into something he was never meant to see. He felt hypnotized as he tried to turn back and leave, but his legs felt heavy. Chitty's warning from that first day gnawed at Ajani's mind. Don't go where you're not invited. Yet, hadn't Pastor Felicia herself extended the invitation? And if this was truly the path to divine favor, why did the air smell faintly of smoke and something metallic, like blood? Ajani's heartbeat quickened as the usher led him to a door at the far end of the corridor. The door was carved with intricate patterns of flames wrapping around a cross, but the flames were red, almost too red, as though they had been painted with something far more sinister than ink. The usher said nothing, only bowing slightly before retreating back into the shadows, leaving Ajani standing alone with only his reflection in the polished wood to keep him company. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, a small candle-lit room awaited him, and at its centre stood Pastor Felicia, her flowing white robe now replaced with a crimson wrapper tied tightly around her waist, her arms adorned with beaded bracelets that clicked softly as she moved. Behind her, 3 other men stood, their faces partially hidden by shadows. Men Ajani recognized from the so-called miracle testimonies earlier that day. His stomach lurched. They weren't here to pray. They were part of something much older and darker than anything he had expected. Pastor Felicia smiled, but this time it was not the warm motherly smile she wore on the altar. It was the smile of a hunter who had just cornered her prey. "Welcome, Ajani," she said softly. "The true sacrifice begins now." Anji's throat went dry, his mind flashing back to the very first day Chidi walked into his collapsing shop in Onitsha, grinning like a man who had touched heaven. That day felt so far away now, with regrets. Back when miracles sounded like salvation, and not a carefully laid trap for exploitation. His eyes darted around the candle-lit room, taking in the chalk-drawn symbols on the floor, the bundles of folded N1000 notes arranged neatly at the base of the candlestand, and the faint metallic scent. A smell Ajani knew too well from his days at the village abattoir. Blood. His chest tightened, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. This was no prayer meeting. This was a ritual, and somehow he had been chosen to play a part.